"Happy Father's Day, Dad," she said, but her words were a lie. I watched through a crack in the door as my only daughter slipped the bank card from my wallet. Her hands, the same hands I once held to teach her how to write, were now stealing from me in my own home. She thought she was taking a piece of my modest retirement fund to pay off her husband's gambling debts. She had no idea she was attempting to steal from a multi-million-dollar corporate trust account I secretly managed for my old law firm. Most of all, she had no idea I was watching her every move. But I didn't scream. I didn't confront her. I didn't even cancel the card. What I did next was far colder, and you will never guess the quiet, devastating revenge a heartbroken father is capable of. Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. The weak rays of a Sunday morning sun, the 3rd of June, stretched across the hardwood floors, waking me from a shallow sleep. At 67, sleep was no longer a dear friend. It came and went like a fussy houseguest, leaving me long, quiet stretches in the night to confront the stillness of my home. Today was Father's Day. A phrase that once held so much joy and laughter now carried the heavy weight of all that was lost. I sat up slowly, my joints creaking in protest. This house in the Columbus suburbs was far too large for one person. In the 10 years since Eleanor, my beloved wife, had passed, silence had become my constant companion. I could still hear the echoes of her in every corner, the bright sound of her laughter from the kitchen, the soft hum of her voice as she gardened, the light patter of her feet on the stairs. Sometimes I wondered if I was holding on to memories, or if I was their prisoner. Since retiring from my position as chief accountant at a major law firm, my life had settled into an almost unchangeable routine. Everything had to be in its place, neat and orderly. It was the only way I knew to keep my mind from drifting into chaos. People said I was calm, thoughtful, but in reality, I was just hiding the fractures in my soul beneath a veneer of control. And the largest, most painful fracture was Melissa, my only daughter. I shuffled toward the wall where I kept the family photos, a visual chronicle of a happiness that had faded. There was Melissa at 5, pigtails sticking straight out, a brilliant smile showing off her first missing tooth. She used to be my sunshine, always chattering, always clinging to my leg. There she was on her high school graduation day, her eyes sparkling with pride and dreams. And then, the wedding photo. She was still smiling, a gorgeous smile, but there was a distance in her eyes I could never quite decipher. That was when David came into her life, and when I began to lose her. David was the kind of son-in-law every father dreads. Polished on the outside, silver-tongued, but inside, a bottomless pit of greed and irresponsibility. He considered gambling a form of investment, and his debts piled up like mushrooms after a rainstorm. To David, I wasn't a father-in-law. I was a doting old fool, a convenient emergency fund. What tore my heart apart wasn't his attitude, but the change in Melissa. She was gradually poisoned by her husband's materialism and deceit. My unconditional love was converted into dollar signs. "Dad, we're a little short on the rent this month." "Dad, David has a sure-thing business opportunity. He just needs a little seed money." "Dad, my car needs urgent repairs. I promise I'll pay you right back." Those promises, of course, were never kept. Each time I gave her money, I lied to myself, telling myself it was the last time, that she truly needed the help. I did it because I was afraid. I was afraid that if I said no, the final thread connecting us would snap. So I kept giving, buying myself brief visits and hollow inquiries, nurturing the fragile hope that somewhere deep down, my little girl was still there, that she still loved me. Today, I had allowed myself to hope for a little more. I went into the kitchen and tied on the old apron Eleanor had bought me. The aroma of onions and celery sautéing in butter began to fill the air, awakening warm memories. Especially the memory of a Father's Day almost 20 years ago. Melissa was only 10, and she had insisted on helping her mother in the kitchen. The result was flour scattered all over the floor and a little girl whose face was smudged like a kitten's. Eleanor had laughed, a clear, bright sound that seemed to echo in the room even now. She had hugged Melissa, kissed her flour-dusted nose, and said to me, "See? Our daughter has your cooking genes." Happiness was so simple then, so tangible. I thought moments like that would last forever. The contrast between that warm past and this cold present sent a dull ache through my chest. I was making a beef stew, the dish Eleanor always made for special occasions. I knew her recipe by heart, better than the most complex balance sheets. Beside it, the apple pie I'd made from scratch had cooled, its crust a perfect sunny gold. I had been up before dawn, preparing everything like a sacred ritual to welcome my daughter. I set the dining table for 3. A stubborn habit, even though I knew the chances of David showing up were slim to none. I carefully spread out the hand-embroidered family heirloom tablecloth, a keepsake from Eleanor. Every plate, every fork, was polished and placed in its precise location. I wanted everything to be perfect, a desperate attempt to recreate a past that could never return. But a knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. It had been a long time since Melissa had truly talked to me. Our recent calls were all hurried, filled with excuses. 12 o'clock. The doorbell chimed, a harsh, sudden sound. My old heart skipped a beat. I quickly untied my apron, smoothed my silver hair, and walked to the door, forcing the most natural smile I could muster. Melissa stood there alone, just as I'd expected. She wore a simple dress, her face etched with a familiar look of fatigue and impatience. No gift, no flowers, not even a small card. "Happy Father's Day, Dad," she said, her voice flat, as if reciting a line she didn't feel. She slipped past me and walked straight into the living room without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes were glued to her phone, as if the world inside it was infinitely more important than the real one where I stood. The indifference was a blast of icy wind to my soul. I closed the door softly, the click of the latch sounding like a sigh. "David couldn't make it?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "He's busy," Melissa replied, not looking up. Her thumb scrolled across the screen at a dizzying speed. I sat in the armchair across from her, feeling completely redundant. I tried to build a bridge. "Does the stew smell familiar?" I used Mom's recipe. "Remember when you were little? You could eat 2 whole bowls." A long silence stretched between us. Finally, she answered, but it was just a mumbled, "Yeah." I tried to keep the conversation alive. "How's work these days? Everything okay?" "Same as always, Dad," she said, her eyes still fixed on the phone. "Stressful. And David? Is he still at the same job?" This time she seemed annoyed. "Dad, we're busy. He's trying to get a new project off the ground." New project, coming from David, that usually meant a new gambling scheme. I swallowed the words I wanted to say. I knew any hint of suspicion would only ignite an argument. "Can you please put down the phone and look at me?" I screamed on the inside, just once. But on the outside, I remained silent. It's been a while. The conversation withered and died, the room filled with an awkward tension. All I could hear was the steady tick-tock of the old grandfather clock on the wall, each tick a hammer blow against the silence between us. I felt ridiculous. A lonely old man, trying to wring affection from a child who no longer had any to give. "Well," I said, standing up to break the silence, "you must be hungry. Let me get the food on the table." I turned and walked toward the kitchen, and in that moment, when I thought the day couldn't possibly get any worse, I was wrong. The kitchen door wasn't fully closed, leaving a small crack. As I was ladling the steaming stew into bowls, an unnatural silence from the living room made me curious. I peered through the crack. Melissa was no longer on the sofa. She was standing next to the armchair where I'd just been sitting, where my jacket was draped over the back. I saw her glance quickly toward the kitchen door, making sure I was still occupied. Then she pulled out her phone. The screen lit up, and though I couldn't read the text, I could feel the tension in her movements as she scrolled through a message. It was from David, I was sure of it. A prod. An order. Her face showed a brief flicker of hesitation, a fleeting internal struggle, but it was quickly replaced by a cold resolve. She put the phone away and made her move. My dark brown leather wallet, my companion for 20 years, was in her hands. I froze, my feet rooted to the floor. I watched as her hand, the same hand I had once held to teach her how to write her first letters, trembled as it opened the wallet. She didn't take any cash. Her eyes scanned past the bills with indifference. Her target was the blue bank card nestled in the innermost slot. Quick as a ghost, she slipped the card out, shoved it into her purse, and placed the wallet back in my jacket pocket, arranging everything just as it had been. The entire act was silent, executed with a horrifying proficiency. I stood there, stunned, the soup ladle still hovering in my hand. The stew was radiating heat, but all I felt was a chill that went straight to my bones. The pain hit without warning, but it was unlike any I had ever known. It wasn't the shock of losing Eleanor. It was the collapse of a final belief, the shattering of the last hope I had so foolishly clung to. My daughter, the daughter I loved more than life itself, had come to her father's house on Father's Day, not to celebrate, but to steal. My blood ran cold. But strangely, through the searing pain, a chilling lucidity rose within me. The rage I expected to feel never came. In its place was an emptiness, a brutal acceptance. I didn't storm out. I didn't scream accusations. I just quietly took a step back, took a deep breath to keep my chest from imploding, and returned to my task. I heard her clear her throat, then the sound of her footsteps returning to the sofa. A few seconds later, her voice called out, "Dad? Need any help in there?" That voice, still so sweet, as if nothing had happened, sent a shiver down my spine. I cleared my throat, forcing my own voice not to tremble. "No, honey. I'm almost done." She just crossed the final line, a calm voice said in my head. She cut the last thread herself. But maybe, just maybe, this was what had to happen. Eleanor had once told me on her deathbed, "James, don't ever shelter her too much. Let her stumble and pick herself up, or she'll never learn to stand on her own." I hadn't listened to her. For 10 years, I had tried to shield Melissa from every consequence. And this was the result. A thief in her own home. The last drop had overflowed the glass. And this time, I wasn't going to wipe it up. I was going to let it wash everything away. The decisive click of the front door closing severed the last pretense of our Father's Day meal. My house sank back into its familiar quiet, but this time, the silence was thicker, heavier. The air itself seemed thick with the betrayal that had just unfolded. I stood motionless in the living room, listening to the sound of Melissa's car fade down the street. She hadn't even looked back, speeding away like a fugitive fleeing the scene of a crime. The half-eaten meal sat on the table. The stew I had spent all morning preparing was growing cold, looking forlorn and pathetic. I didn't clean up. I didn't want to do anything. Instead, I walked to the armchair where my jacket lay, where the silent drama had played out. My hand, with a controlled tremor, reached into the pocket and pulled out the leather wallet. I already knew it was gone. I had seen it with my own eyes. But I still needed to confirm it, to feel the emptiness with my own fingertips. I opened the wallet. The card slot, where the blue bank card had resided for so many years, was now a void. A physical void that perfectly mirrored the one my daughter had just carved into my heart. The rage I had been waiting for never arrived. There was no urge to call and scream at her, no impulse to chase her down and demand it back. There was only a profound, cold disappointment, like an iceberg slowly sinking every other emotion. And then, Eleanor's voice echoed in my mind, as clear as if she were standing right beside me. I remembered an afternoon years ago, when Melissa was a teenager and had lied to get money to go out with friends. When I found out, I was going to let it slide, but Eleanor had taken my hand and said, "James, don't shelter her too much. You see, it starts with little lies like this. If we don't let her face the consequences of her choices now, the mistakes will be so much bigger later. Promise me, you'll let her learn from her own falls." I hadn't kept my promise. For 10 years, I had tried to build a wall around her, using my money and my love to patch over her mistakes. But today, I realized I hadn't been protecting her at all. I was merely postponing the inevitable collapse. Worse, I had robbed her of the chance to learn and to grow. It was time to let her take responsibility. It was time to keep my promise to Eleanor. My hand trembled as I picked up my phone. For a moment of weakness, I scrolled to Melissa in my contacts. My thumb hovered over the call button. Maybe I should give her one last chance. A chance to confess, to turn back, to say she was sorry. Maybe I was being too harsh. But then Eleanor's face appeared in my mind's eye, her gaze both loving and stern. The promise echoed again. If I called now, I would soften. I would forgive. And the toxic cycle would continue. She would never learn her lesson. Number. This time had to be different. I took a deep breath, exited my contacts, and opened a web browser. This wasn't the act of an angry father. It was the act of an accountant gathering evidence. I closed the wallet and set it on the table. Instead of succumbing to rage, I walked into my study, the room where I had spent the better part of my life analyzing numbers and finding the truth behind them. I opened my old but reliable laptop. The screen glowed to life, pushing back the shadows in the room. My bony fingers typed the password for my bank's website, a sequence of characters familiar to the point of boredom. My account page appeared. Everything looked normal. The balance was there. But I wasn't looking at the numbers. I clicked on transaction history and enabled real-time alerts. Then I just sat there, in silence, and waited. My eyes were glued to the screen, like a hunter patiently waiting for the prey to walk into the trap. In the car speeding down the highway, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Melissa sat in the passenger seat, her hands clutching her purse, the bank card inside feeling like a hot coal. Her face was pale, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror as if she feared her father would come chasing after them. "Calm down," David said, his voice oozing self-satisfaction. He kept one hand on the wheel, patting her thigh with the other. "It's fine. You did great." "I don't know, David," Melissa whispered. "My conscience is killing me. That's my father, and today is Father's Day. I feel like we just crossed a line we can never uncross." David scoffed. "A line? The only line that matters is the one between being broke and being comfortable, Melissa. And we're trying to cross it. Think about it. Has he ever really let you make your own decisions? He always controlled you with money. We're just taking back what's rightfully yours. This is for our future, for our family. The old man owes you. You're his only daughter. All his assets will be yours someday anyway. Think of it as an advance on your inheritance. Don't be so weak. We really need this money." His words were a sweet poison, simultaneously soothing her guilt and justifying her crime. It was true. They desperately needed the money. David's gambling debts were due, and his loan sharks were not patient men. "I bet the old man keeps his whole pension in there," David continued, his eyes gleaming with greed. "Retired chief accountant? He's got to have a nice nest egg. Tens of thousands, maybe even 100 grand. Melissa didn't answer. She was silent, a war raging inside her between guilt and desperation. She pulled the card from her purse. The blue plastic looked so innocent, yet it held the full weight of her betrayal. "Pull into that gas station," David ordered. "There's an ATM. Let's try to get some cash first." "Try for $500. Melissa nodded mechanically. David pulled into the parking lot. "You go," he said. "I'll keep a lookout here." Melissa's feet felt like lead as she walked toward the ATM. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She inserted the card into the slot. The sound of the machine swallowing it was horrifying. She typed in the PIN, her own birthday, a choice she had once found touching, now felt like a sick joke. She selected withdrawal and entered 500. The machine began its familiar whirring. Melissa held her breath. The screen read, "Processing your transaction." 10 seconds felt like an eternity. Then, a dry beep. "Transaction denied. Please contact your bank." The card was ejected. Not a single bill appeared. The blood drained from Melissa's face. She snatched the card and hurried back to the car, panic beginning to rise. "Well?" David demanded as soon as she opened the door. "It was declined," she whispered. "What?" David snapped, his smugness vanishing, replaced by irritation. "That's impossible. Maybe the ATM is busted, or it's a daily withdrawal limit. Let's try something else." He grabbed Melissa's phone and pulled up a luxury goods website. "Give me the card," he commanded. He quickly selected an expensive watch worth $2,000 and entered her father's card information at checkout. "Let's see the old man block this," he muttered. He hit confirm purchase. The page spun. A message appeared. "Your order has been received and is awaiting authorization." "See?" David smirked. "It was just that stupid ATM. It probably went through." They sat in the car, waiting. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. The silence grew increasingly tense. Just then, Melissa's phone buzzed, a new email notification. "Your order number 743B9 has been canceled. The payment transaction was not successful." David swore, slamming his fist on the steering wheel. "Damn it! How is that possible? Is there no money in the account?" Melissa was trembling. Or maybe Dad found out and already canceled the card? "No way," David shot back, though his voice had lost its certainty. "We just left. How could he know that fast? It must be an issue with the bank. We'll have to try again later." He started the car and peeled out of the parking lot, his rage undisguised. Melissa shrank in her seat, a cold dread washing over her. This was no longer the sting of a guilty conscience. This was the fear of a thief who had just been caught, even if there was no one there to accuse her. I sat motionless in my study, the only light in the twilight room coming from the laptop screen. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the trees in burnt orange, the last streaks of a dying day. But I paid the sunset no mind. My entire focus was on the online banking portal, where every line of text, every number was a potential knife's edge, cold and sharp. The room smelled of old paper and oak, the scent of 40 years of order and logic, a world I had built to keep life's chaos at bay. Today, that chaos had found its way in. And then it began. A small notification popped up in the corner of the screen, silently, like a ghost. "Transaction alert. Attempted cash withdrawal of $500 from ATM at Speedway gas station number 451. Time, 12:47 p.m. Status, denied." I stared at the words, each letter burning into my mind. Speedway number 451. A 15-minute drive from my house. My heart didn't beat any faster. My breathing didn't quicken. I just felt a cold hollowness spread through my chest, a newly dug pit that nothing could fill. She couldn't even wait until she got home. Her haste exposed all her desperation and recklessness, a craving so intense it had eclipsed all reason. I closed my eyes, a crystal-clear image of Melissa at the ATM flashing in my mind. I could see her slender shoulders, her slightly messy hair, her face hidden behind sunglasses to conceal her anxiety. Was she scared? Or was she guided only by greed, a greed fanned into flame by her gambling husband? I didn't know which answer was more painful. 15 minutes later, another notification appeared, this one even more brazen. Transaction alert. Attempted online purchase of $2,000 from Luxury Watch Emporium. Time: 1:03 p.m. Status: awaiting authorization. Luxury Watch Emporium. Such a pretentious, frivolous name. This had to be David's idea. That gambler was always obsessed with gaudy trinkets to mask his own emptiness. An expensive watch wouldn't pay off his debts, but it would give him the momentary illusion of success. They were testing the system, testing the limits of my silence. A few minutes later, the words, awaiting authorization, turned a brilliant red, like a splash of blood on the screen. Status: denied. A heavy sigh escaped my chest. I stood up and walked to the small bar in the corner of the room. My hand was perfectly steady as I poured a glass of single malt scotch, a drink I reserved for special occasions or when my mind required absolute stillness. I dropped a large ice cube into the glass. The sound of it clinking against the crystal was sharp in the dead silence. I took a sip. The familiar, peaty smoke spread across my palate, but it couldn't warm the ice in my soul. I pictured the blue bank card in my mind. Melissa and David thought they were trying to access a simple old man's pension fund. They were wrong. They had no idea they had just tried to poke a hornet's nest, one protected by the best lawyers in the city. The memory came flooding back, taking me to a day 6 years ago, a year after I'd officially retired. I was sitting in the plush office of Mr. Henderson, the managing partner of the law firm where I had dedicated nearly 40 years of my life. The room overlooked the entire city, but my attention was on the serious expression of the man across from me. James, Mr. Henderson had said, his voice deep and authoritative. We have a favor to ask. Something that requires absolute trust, the kind that can't be bought. He explained that the firm managed several large trust funds for long-term clients, including one particularly complex fund involving the disputed assets of a wealthy family. The fund required an independent overseer, someone with third-party signatory authority to release funds in specific circumstances. Most importantly, that person had to be completely clean and no longer involved in the firm's day-to-day operations to ensure objectivity. We reviewed all the candidates, Mr. Henderson continued, and no one is more trustworthy than you, James. You managed this firm's books for 4 decades without a single error. Your integrity is your greatest asset. It was a great honor. I had accepted. They set up a special account in my name, but it was, in effect, a corporate account. Every dollar in it belonged to clients, stringently protected by law. For added security, the account was set up with multiple layers of authentication. Any large cash withdrawal or transfer would be automatically declined, triggering a security alert sent directly to the firm's legal department. That was why Melissa and David's attempts had failed. They weren't up against a forgetful old man. They were up against a corporate financial security system. I returned to the present, tasting the bitterness of the scotch and the truth. The trust an entire law firm had placed in me, my own daughter was willing to trample for a few $1,000s. My faith in her hadn't collapsed today. It had been eroding for years, like a cliff face beaten relentlessly by the waves. I remembered the time she called me in the middle of the night, panicked, saying her car had broken down on the highway and she needed money for repairs. I had rushed to transfer the funds, only to find out later she was at a casino with David. I remembered David's presentations of once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunities, and Melissa using her innocent eyes to convince me. Every time I gave them the money, and every time it never came back. Each time I made excuses for her. She was young, she was manipulated by her husband, She had just lost her way. I clung to the image of the little girl who used to make me clumsy Father's Day cards. But today, there were no excuses left. The act of stealing the card from my home on the day she was supposed to honor me was the final straw. This was no longer a lie or an act of manipulation. This was a crime. She hadn't just betrayed my trust. She had personally pushed me away, demolishing the last bridge between us with her own hands. Eleanor had been right. I had sheltered her for too long, and my protection had become a kind of poison, paralyzing her ability to distinguish right from wrong. Now I would no longer intervene. I would not call Melissa to confront her. I would not cancel the card. I would let events run their natural course. This play had to be seen through to its conclusion. She had written the script herself, and she would have to face the consequences. The calm of a seasoned accountant took over. Emotions were set aside. It was time for numbers and evidence. I put down my scotch and returned to the computer. I took screenshots of the transaction alerts, saving them in an encrypted folder. Then I logged back into the account and printed a detailed statement. The printer in the corner whirred to life, its mechanical sound breaking the silence. Page by page, the evidence slid out, detailing the 2 failed transaction attempts. They weren't just numbers. They were irrefutable proof of a crime. When the last page printed, I stapled them together neatly. Then I picked up my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and stopped at a name: Robert Miller. Robert had been a junior lawyer at the firm when I was there. Now he was a senior partner. He was smart, sharp, and someone I trusted completely. I took a deep breath and hit call. "James!" What a surprise! Robert's warm, friendly voice came through the line. "Happy Father's Day. Everything all right?" "Thank you, Robert," I replied, my voice even and devoid of emotion. "I'm calling about an issue with the trust account that's in my name." The friendliness in Robert's voice vanished instantly, replaced by the focused attention of a lawyer. "What's going on, James?" "I suspect there's been an unauthorized access attempt on the account," I said, choosing my words carefully. "There have been 2 declined transactions in the last hour. One from an ATM, one an online purchase." I heard the clatter of a keyboard on the other end as Robert accessed the system. "I see it," he said after a moment, his voice grave. "Automatic declines." The security system worked as designed. "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" This was the moment of decision. I could lie. I could say I'd lost the card. But I was so tired of lies. "I have reason to believe the person responsible is my daughter, Melissa Parker," I said, my voice clear and steady. A long silence stretched on the other end of the line. I could picture the shock on Robert's face. "James, I really don't know what to say," he finally said, his tone sympathetic but professional. "I'm so sorry to hear this. I remember her as a little girl, running around the office. But you have to understand, this is no longer a family matter. This account is firm property. It's client money. Any intentional attempt to withdraw funds without authorization is considered corporate financial fraud. It's a felony." "I understand," I replied, my voice firm. "That's why I'm calling you." I had known what his answer would be, but hearing it from a lawyer solidified my decision. The path forward was clear. "We'll begin an internal investigation immediately," Robert said. "Thank you for reporting this so promptly, James." "You did the right thing." I hung up, placing the phone down next to the stack of bank statements. They sat there on the oak desk, silent, like evidence of a love that had died. The storm had been set in motion. Now all I had to do was wait for it to hit. A week passed in a heavy silence, a quiet that was louder than any argument. I didn't call Melissa. She didn't call me. Between us lay an invisible chasm, a canyon created by a single act, and now there was no bridge that could span it. I tried to maintain my daily routine, reading the paper, tending the garden, organizing my ledgers, but my mind was always somewhere else. Sometimes, while watering the plants, I would find myself looking down the road, half expecting, half dreading the sight of Melissa's car. At night, I sat at the dining table and stared at the two empty chairs across from me, their silence more accusatory than any words. I picked up the phone many times, only to put it down again. I didn't know what I would say, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to hear. That week felt like a decade. Every day, I lived with the dull throb of a festering wound. I walked through the empty rooms where the echoes of my daughter's childhood laughter seemed to hang in the air. I had set a storm in motion, and now I could only wait for it to sweep through her life and through mine. On Monday morning, a week after that fateful Father's Day, I knew the trap had been sprung. Robert called me, his voice professional but tinged with sympathy. A formal summons printed on the firm's stately letterhead had been sent via certified mail to Melissa and David's address. The meeting was set for Wednesday afternoon. "Are you sure you want to be there, James?" Robert asked, his voice full of concern. "It won't be easy. You have every right not to face them." "I have to be there," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "I started this, and I will finish it. She needs to see me there." On Wednesday afternoon, I arrived at the law office 15 minutes early. I sat in the luxurious conference room, a familiar space with its mahogany-paneled walls, long polished table, and supple leather chairs. But today, the room felt more like a Roman Colosseum, and I was both a spectator and the one to decide the gladiator's fate. I sat at one end of the table, my back straight, my hands folded neatly in front of me, just as I had sat here countless times to discuss multi-million-dollar contracts. But this time, what lay on the line was infinitely more valuable: my last remaining relationship. At precisely 3 o'clock, the door opened. Melissa and David walked in, followed by Robert. Their expressions were a strange mix of confusion and a hint of smug arrogance. David wore a suit that looked expensive but fit him poorly. He offered Robert a sociable smile, clearly thinking this was just some annoying bank formality, perhaps to verify the identity of a senile old man. Melissa looked more anxious. When she saw me sitting there, a flicker of panic crossed her eyes, but she quickly masked it. She avoided my gaze, an act of guilt more telling than any confession. "Please, have a seat," Robert said formally, gesturing to the chairs across from me. Once they were settled, Robert took his seat at the head of the table, placing a thin file folder down with a soft but authoritative thud. Silence descended. "Thank you both for coming," Robert began, breaking the quiet. "I'm Robert Miller, a partner at Henderson & Associates. We've asked you here today to clarify a security issue concerning a trust account managed by our firm." David raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "A trust account? I think there's been a misunderstanding. My wife just thought there was a problem with her father's bank card." He emphasized the words, "her father," a subtle attempt to remind everyone this was just a private family matter. Robert did not smile. He pushed a piece of paper across the table toward them. "This is a copy of the statement from the bank account in question, documenting 2 failed transaction attempts on Sunday, June 15th. One attempt to withdraw $500 from an ATM, and one attempt to make an online purchase of $2,000. The color drained from Melissa's face. David glanced at the statement, then at me, a smirk forming on his lips. "Oh, I get it. This is a family thing. Old man, you didn't have to make it so complicated. Your daughter was just borrowing a little money." "Sir," Robert interrupted, his voice like ice, "this is not a family matter. And this is not a little money. Under Ohio state law, this is defined as financial fraud." Silence fell again, this time heavy with menace. The smug look vanished from David's face. "Melissa Parker," Robert said, his tone now that of a prosecutor in a courtroom. "Do you admit to taking a bank card from the wallet of Mr. James Parker without his permission and subsequently attempting to make these transactions?" Melissa shrank in her chair, speechless. All eyes were on her. She could only stare down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. "Your silence can be taken as an admission," Robert continued. "And perhaps that silence stems from a grave misunderstanding. You believed this was your father's personal savings account, correct?" Melissa nodded faintly, a desperate tiny movement. Robert shook his head slowly. "You were mistaken. The account you attempted to access does not contain a single cent of Mr. James Parker's retirement funds. This is a corporate trust fund. The money in it belongs to clients of this law firm. Your actions were not an attempt to steal from your father. You attempted to steal from one of the largest law firms in the state of Ohio." David, who always thought himself so clever, was the first to grasp the magnitude of the situation. His phony confidence shattered. He shot to his feet, pointing a finger at me. You set us up. You damned old man. You knew the whole time," he screamed, his voice cracking with fear and rage. Robert Miller didn't flinch. "Sir," he said, his voice cold as steel, "the only person setting traps here is you, when you incited your wife to commit a felony. Please sit down." Robert's words were a bucket of ice water, extinguishing David's fury. He stood stunned for a moment, then collapsed back into his chair, his face ashen. The room seemed to hold its breath. Melissa's head snapped up, her eyes wide with horror and disbelief. She looked from me to Robert and back again, as if searching for a sign that this was all just a cruel joke. But our faces held only the cold, hard truth. "No, that's not possible," she stammered. Robert gave her no time to process the shock. He turned to David. "And you, Mr. Miller. Our preliminary investigation shows you currently have significant gambling debts. Was it your intention to use this money to pay them off?" David flinched. I didn't know what she was doing. This is between her and her father." "Do not take us for fools, sir," Robert said, his voice sharp. "We have sufficient reason to believe you were the architect of this plan, and we are also aware that corporate financial fraud carries a sentence of 5 to 10 years in prison, along with substantial fines." The air in the room felt solid. Their futures had just been laid out on the table, and they were bleak. Melissa began to tremble uncontrollably. David looked like he was about to pass out. "However," Robert continued, his tone softening slightly, "given the decades of dedicated and loyal service Mr. James Parker has given this firm, and because he reported the incident immediately, the firm is willing to consider an alternative. We are prepared to let this go with a severe warning and not press criminal charges, on the condition that you both sign a legally binding agreement to never repeat such an act, and to completely sever all financial contact with this account." It was an escape hatch, a mercy they didn't deserve. And it was all thanks to the reputation I had spent a lifetime building. A long silence followed. Finally, Melissa began to cry. Not the fake, manipulative tears I had seen so many times before. These were the choked, broken sobs of a true and total collapse. She looked at me, her tear-filled eyes brimming with accusation and pain. "Dad," she wept, "why didn't you just tell me? Why didn't you tell me the truth?" The room fell silent, waiting for my answer. I looked directly into my daughter's eyes, the pain of 10 years compressed into a single moment. "I have been telling you my whole life, Melissa," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "I told you with every debt I paid. I told you with every hollow promise I chose to believe. I told you with my own breaking heart every time you walked out the door with what you wanted. The problem is, you were never really listening." I stood up and straightened my jacket. My part in this drama was over. There was nothing more to say. I turned to leave, to abandon them to the wreckage they had created for themselves. As I reached the door, I paused. There was one last thing that needed to be said. I turned back, looked directly into Melissa's tear-streaked eyes, and this time, I let no trace of pity enter my voice. There are some things you should never touch. A father's trust is one of them. I opened the door and walked out, without a backward glance. I left behind a dead silence in that room, a silence filled with a brutal truth and lost chances. I drove home in the fading light. The city was still bustling, alive, completely unaware that a world had just ended. When I arrived at the empty house, I didn't turn on the lights. I walked straight to my study and sat down in my familiar armchair. I opened a desk drawer and took out an old picture frame. In the photo, Eleanor was smiling, her radiant, warm smile that seemed capable of chasing away any darkness. I looked into her eyes, feeling an infinite sadness wash over me. "I did what had to be done, my love," I whispered to the photograph. "I kept my promise. No matter how much it hurt." The last of the sunset streamed through the window, casting my long, solitary shadow across the floor. I had lost my only daughter that day, but in that profound loss, I had reclaimed my own dignity. A few weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived. There was no return address, but I recognized Melissa's script immediately. The envelope was thin, likely holding only a single sheet of paper. I held it in my hand, feeling the weight of unspoken words. I didn't open it. Instead, I walked to the fireplace, where a small fire was burning despite the mild evening. I looked at the letter one last time, and then I quietly dropped it into the flames. The fire licked at the paper, turning the words to ash. I didn't need an apology, nor did I need an explanation. It was over. Watching the flames dance for the first time in 10 years, I felt a true and genuine peace. The road ahead was long and lonely, but at least it was my own. If you found this story compelling, please like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear our next story, click on the box on the left of your screen. Thank you for watching.